Hello and welcome to my demo. This is Dominic Domingo. I'm a background painter and visual development artist with about almost 30 years of experience in the industry. I started at Disney back when Rescuers Down Under was in production and Beauty and the Beast was in development. So I worked there for about 11 years, and now in the 20 years since, I've been freelancing on CG films, here and there, the traditionally animated film, television animation, gaming, you name it. So this is going to be a demo not on any one particular technique per se. I have other demos on photo bashing. I have other demos on what I call the copy method of creating new layers and painting into them from by making selections from subsequent layers, which is really quick and dirty. This is not any one particular technique, but a mishmash, and it's just how I approach, a background, billboard, matte painting. We're going to call this a moment painting or a story beat for the moment with just a layout. So I'm not doing a value study in advance. I'm not doing a color key in advance. I'm creating my color as I go, which is not always wise if, it's on a film and you have to conform it to a color script, for example. But anyway, I'm just kind of going at it with a really rough, quick and dirty layout. And here we go. Boop. Okay, so here you'll see I've got the layout as a multiplied layer on top. I turn down the opacity to about 34% and toggle it on and off as needed. But I've got that on the top. I've got a sort of a violet ground underneath just to give me a sense of the palette without being too obtrusive or, affecting the colors that I lay on top of it. But it's better than staring at a white canvas. So I've created a quick layer for the water, and I'm just randomly painting into it. And I guess what I'm thinking in advance is I do want the water to be sort of magical, like a greenish turquoise color and almost unreal and fantastical. So I'm just kind of, finding my way, and I guess I'm thinking that I want the areas that are not receiving the ambient light from the sky to be the true local color of the water, and then the ripples on the backside, and there will be ripples, by the way. Looks pretty glassy, smooth right now, but the sort of magenta or violet ambiance of the sky is going to affect every part of the water that is not in shadow and that is not receiving a reflection from the rocks. So that's the logic I'm going to create, and then later when I start rendering and modeling and creating some kind of brushwork, I'm going to try to emulate what I really admire in a lot of plein air paintings, which is the understanding that each side of a ripple has a different color note. So the back side of a wave might be picking up the color from the sky, whereas the front side is picking up some kind of ambiance or some kind of reflected light. And so it's a really interesting equation when you have reflections of the rocks sort of vertically affecting the water. You also have cast shadows and contact shadows affecting the hue, value, and saturation of the water. And then you have this violet ambiance from above, which is a little bit at odds with the green. So anyway, later there will be a lot more color interest and a lot more variation when I start getting into brushwork and I guess rendering the surface of the water a little more, making the waves a little choppier. So again, it's so boring to just watch somebody sort of fill space, but I'm trying to let you in on my thought process. I'm incorporating a little more of the local color of the rocks closer to where they're reflecting in the water, and then defaulting back to the greenish watercolor. Okay, now I am thinking about staging straight out the gate because I don't have a value structure. So here I'm just always vignetting, especially in a dark theater, you just always want your edges to be darker, and you want the hot spot or the focal point to be where the story's being told. So you'll see I'm going a little bluer in the corner, so it's reminiscent of the water, and there's some harmony there. But I'm also trying to find the right range and the right degree of warmth in the sky so that I can create some warmer ambiance. It's supposed to be a very, not like a fiery sunset, but there we go, late in the day, and the sun is rather low. We're going to have some direct alpine light hitting the rocks, alpine's, direct sunlight. But the sky itself, I wanted to keep it sort of peachy in ambiance and then defaulting to a sky color that is related to the water. Okay, so you'll see later we're going to have clouds that are actually catching the direct light as well, and little cirrus clouds, little wisps of clouds. But I'm just, and I hate to start rendering right away. I'm trying to just block things in and figure out the value structure that'll best tell the story and the color palette that'll best emotionally tell the story. But sometimes, and here, that's kind of what I'm doing here, I have to render a little bit or sort of define things a little bit and get a little too noodly, a little too fast. I prefer to hold off on that. But sometimes you have to do that in order to figure out the logic to your color and how you're going to sort of keep it clean, especially in a sky. If it's not LA, you generally want to go analogously and keep the color clean. Okay, so now I'm basically just selecting. I have a little bit of a blur on my lasso tool, so I don't have to be too precise about the selections. And I am gonna, I could paint them directly, but it's so quick to just, copy from the sky layer and, and then lock the layer and paint into it really quickly to determine, again, your hue, value, and saturation. So, that would have taken a long time to just worry about edge control and brushwork and how lost and found edges if I just painted it directly. But now I'm just I'm going to create all the layers that way. I'm going to call them planes, all the planes. I'm going to use the copy method. And that doesn't mean it's the ultimate edge control. I'm going to then go back in and create some diffusion with loose brush strokes. So this whole painting is going to be a process of defining and then sort of, fragmenting things, I guess is the way to put it, but creating some kind of expressive loose brush strokes over the top so everything's married together. But that's way down the line, not brushwork technique, rendering technique. That's down the line. So I'm just trying to get my main planes in their foreground, middle ground, background, and trying to establish the influences. What are the direct lighting influences? What is the warm and cool relationship? What is the ambient light how is it gonna affect the content and the forms? One thing I won't credit the person, I don't know why, but a friend of mine, a great painter, basically tells his students always have a warm-cool relationship with regard to light and shadow, and that's one great way of keeping your color clean. In other words, not pasty, not muddy, as they say. And so I always think of that. I try to have a warm, cool relationship with regard to lighting. And then another thing that's really helpful is just assign a local color to everything. I tend to put everything everywhere because I want to introduce one thing into the next as lighting or as ambient light or something. But the truth is then you have color spottiness, which is just as damaging as value spottiness. So anyway, that's two great ways to keep your color clean and to keep, from being pasty, as they say, or muddy, as they say. Always have a warm, cool relationship that correlates with lighting, and then always assign a local color to each object. Now that seems obvious, but some of us have to struggle, have to try really hard at that. So the rocks are basically all the same color for now. There's going to be buildings on top, there's going to be moss hanging off, there's going to be a bridge. But I want the rocks to feel the same color. What I'm thinking about here is the foremost one that you're seeing that's been painted is in shadow. Now some of the buildings higher up are going to be catching direct light on top of that plateau. But other than that, I'm now stepping things back into the atmosphere, and there's this effect that you'll often see in photographs where at a certain distance, without any warm direct light on it, those silhouetted rock forms can be more saturated than the sky behind them. So that's what I'm thinking there, and I'm going to continue to adjust as I go. I'm not committing to any of this. So now I want to get, I would say the value range and everything else other than this foreground element probably ventures from a 2.5 to about a 7. I want to get my 8s and 9s in there. So that's what I'm doing here on the foreground. Just establishing my range of values. And then everything else is going to just be an intended contrast or juxtaposition within that range. So I'm putting a little bit of form in these, and I'm beginning to think about, the down-facing planes being warmer, the sort of side planes receiving a little bit of raking ambient cool light from above, but the top ridges, everything that is receiving light from the sky is literally going to be blue. Okay, so now here's that alpine light. Sometimes it's the horizon that blocks the light. Sometimes it's a mountain. I'm not really thinking too much about it, but I am creating this feeling that only the highest objects are receiving the direct warm light because the sun is rather low. So I'm going to do this on select areas of my painting where, which will help create a focal point, help direct the eye, and help tell a story, hopefully. The things that are receiving the light are meant to be looked at. Okay, so now back to the selection tool. I'm going to create that main rock. And I guess I'm thinking about focal point too. Eventually, I'm going to put edge control that assigns what I call a focal distance. So you could throw your foreground elements out of focus. You could throw the distant most elements like the horizon and the distant ships out of focus. And you could focus on a certain distance, 200 yards, 300 yards. And, some people just in plein air painting sort of have this conviction that things are blurrier the farther away they are. Well, that's not true. It depends on one's eyesight, and it depends on where one is focusing. And a camera is the same. You assign a focal distance. And I hope that makes sense. And that's what we're doing all day, every day in filmmaking. We usually create the sharpest edges or the sharpest degree of focus in the area where the story is being told. So in a Disney film, which, a lot of the Disney techniques became pretty universal, and all the other studios, Disney, DreamWorks, PDI, Pixar, have adopted a lot of the conventions in the production pipeline. We tend to sort of use, a pool of light or a chiaroscuro approach for staging. Usually that pool of light spills into the midground. So you then have silhouetted foreground elements, and you might have sort of the BG level being diffused. But the sharpest area is usually the middle ground where that pool of light exists, and it's actually going to be the crispest because the character animation is crisp. It's going to be hard-edged pretty much any way you slice it. So you want to create the harder edges right in that area where the character is going to be staged. Again, hope that makes sense. So now I'm creating the direct light on that rock. I'm going analogously, the darker tones where the rock is turning, it's receiving raking light, and more texture is going to come out in those halftones. But I'm going a little oranger, a little redder, and then I'm going yellower as I go toward the lighter values. Now, I intentionally bleach out the lightest values. You wouldn't want it to be neon yellow. And, that's... it rings true. I think you get highlights that are devoid of color on a shiny object, and then you pick up more and more saturation as you move through the halftones toward the form shadow. Okay, so let's see what's happening now. I'm going to create that same diagonal cast shadow that's on the foreground element. I'm going to create that anywhere I can on the rock to create, the consistency that communicates how high the sun is in the sky. Not a whole lot to talk about here. I do wish you could see and understand the logic behind why I'm doing what I'm doing. I can't explain every brush. I really can't explain why I'm resizing the window so much. I apologize. Here I'm loading brushes because I have a little bug. My brushes, as you can see, they overlap one another and you can't view them. There's a bug. And so I'm just starting from scratch, and I reset all my brushes. Ignore that. Okay, so now I think I'm going to start selecting that flying ship. That's what I'm doing, at least the sail. And I want that. It is the focal point. It is the midground, and it is basically where the story is being told. So I'm keeping it real crisp, and the selection tool, the copy method, helps with that. Now I'm going to rough it up a little bit and make it a little more painterly when I paint it so it matches the rest of the painting, but the hard edges are my best friend right now. Okay, so just quickly going to rough out a silhouette of that ship and then paint the lighting into that level after locking it. All right then, so quick and dirty selection, bam, I'm going to fill it. Darken it to the proper value, but of course it's devoid of color, so now I'm relating it to its environment by adding a little color. meaning, I guess, magenta. And now I'm going to begin to plan the direct light on the ship that'll create the highest contrast in the piece. And again, copying that level, then finding the right hue value and saturation for the lit area on it. And then you'll see I'm going to use the color dodge tool to, oh, sorry, that wasn't dark enough. I'm darkening the tip, the form shadow in the tip, so it passes in front of that rock. Okay, now with regard to the lit area, it's pretty flat, pretty graphic, but I'm employing this little trick. There we go. If I want to pull that corner forward, there's a little graphic trick, whether it's, you know, reflective of real life or not, I don't know, but it graphically pulls that corner forward to do a reverse gradation where it culminates at that front leading edge. And I'm going to try to do the same thing in the ship, although it turns. Anyway, you'll see. Getting a little more painterly there to get a sense of how I'm going to finish this thing up. Now, believe it or not, you're going to see me paint the contact shadow there. I'm going to bring some cool into the contact shadow, but I also need the underside of that, I don't know what you call it, that board, and that's extremely warm because it would be in this scenario. You know, direct light can bleach out, whereas reflected light, think of a really beautiful, I don't know, like a Sargent painting, where the direct light on the chest and the face kind of bleaches out, but then there's this beautiful warmth on the underside of the chin that's reflecting back up. So it's exponentially warmer because it's skin receiving usually warm light that's then bouncing up into the shadow. So it's less overexposed and more saturated. All right, then, oh, I put, by the way, it puts, you know, some of the influence of the sky into the shadow side of that ship. So as it gets higher in the atmosphere, I want it, you know, I'm trying to create a sense of scale with all of this too. So even an object like this floating vehicle, here we go, I'm selecting some areas in the shadow to send up into the atmosphere and relate to the sky color, you'll see. You know, a little lighter, a little more sort of magenta or blue. But I'm defaulting, to, believe it or not, to almost a cyan in the strongest areas of ambient light. In other words, look at the top left corner of the sky. It's pretty cyan. And so by the time you get overhead, way away from the sun and the warmth in the sky, it would be almost as cyan as the water. And that's the logic I'm applying. Okay, so what's happening now? Oh, I'm just revisiting that because I really had an effect in mind that I've seen in photographs and other paintings where, again, that can be really saturated for no seemingly good reason at all. The sky is bleached out, maybe overexposed, but then at a certain distance, the atmosphere can create a lot of saturation. So I'm working on that. I'm creating the warmth that is not direct light from the sun, but relates it to the hidden sun. So I'm going to commit to that for now. Might be too yellow, but we'll see. And now, what am I doing? Oh, and so I didn't want this to go on forever, and I wanted to keep the demo short. So I've obviously added clouds, I've added the distantmost ship, and I've added a bridge. And everything will be integrated eventually. Have faith, okay? So that's the state of the art now, and we're going to pick it up in just 1 second.